Hello and welcome. Joe Holbrook, the Cloud Tech Guy, coming at you from Jacksonville, Florida. Wanted to reach out, do a quick shout out to my fellow YouTube fans, subscribers, trolls, whatever. Wanted to give you an update. I just took the cloud engineer exam from Google. And I was pleasantly surprised compared to the other exams that Google had. I have to say this one here was very well written and pretty much covered topics that you should expect to see on the exam. When it comes to the Associate Cloud Engineer, the cost is $75. There was 104 questions on the beta exam. You got 4 hours to take the test. Honestly, you probably don't need it if you've used the platform before. Plenty of time to go through it. The only downside to the exam that I found and again is they use Criterion. It's just a I don't know what the rationale is, but they're just a terrible system. It's clunky and seems like no one, really uses them except for Google, but perhaps I'm wrong. I am in Jacksonville. I had one choice to take the test. Other than that, it's funny because I'm going to take another test while I'm out in San Francisco, and there's one place in San Francisco. Oddly enough, I don't know how that works out, but with Pearson, you get like 30 choices, even in a hick town like Jacksonville. Okay, enough about the testing. Everything else is great. There's a blog post that was posted by Google. The link is there. I'm going to go ahead and show it to you now. During the next hour or so, or 50 minutes, I'm keeping it under 50 minutes. I'm going to go through the almost exact, what you need to study. And what I mean by that is I can't give you the answers or tell you exactly what you should expect, but I can certainly, keep it within a reasonable limit. I did take notes like right after I got out of the test. Everything was fresh in my head. I think I covered in just this slide deck and what we're going to cover in the next 50 minutes, pretty much 85% to 90% of the test. There's probably 2 things that I didn't write down that I just didn't remember, maybe 3 total at the very, very most, but I think I did a pretty good job. This was actually a very easy test from what I, gathered from my feeling. It's not particularly difficult. Just a lot of syntaxes to remember and a lot of Windows sort of related. When I say Windows related questions, for those folks that took the Windows exams back in the 2000s and so, how you had to memorize, like, you go to the start menu and then from the start menu you go to options, and then from options you click there. So it's like what I call the clicky tricky questions. You have to know exactly what menu and what interface. Other than that, there's probably, I think, 6 of those questions total where you needed to know. And I'll go through here in a second, IAM and specific areas to click and find billing and stuff like that, but nothing particularly difficult. Okay, let's go over to the browser. Okay, first of all, let's just take a quick look at the Cloud Engineer page. For those folks, you can see Google is slowly building up the portfolio of certifications. Now, the Associate Cloud Engineer course is the beginning cert. Once that's in production, I would assume. Again, the areas it tested were pretty straightforward. I would encourage you to read this. It is a beta, so you did save some money. That's good. So if you go over the outline, I wanted to point out a few things. You could see that Google, they call this the outline. I call this really the objectives. this is what they're testing you on. There is definitely pretty much everything in the objectives was tested in the beta. I'm going to go through the billing calculators and billing with you to tell you where you want to focus on. As far as data storage options, network services, so on and so on. Definitely quite a bit there to study. Kubernetes was heavily tested. Compute engine, heavily tested. When I say heavily tested, I want to say at least 4 to 5 questions. And again, if you have 20 subjects and you got 4 questions tested just on one area, and you know that some areas are going to be heavily tested, whereas some of the others maybe just 1 or 2 questions. Now, a couple things to point out when we go to, for example, data solutions. You definitely should know the services and why you want to choose Cloud SQL and Data Store, Cloud Spanner. I'm going to go through how to talk about the difference between SQL and Cloud Spanner and where to use cloud storage versus Dataproc and Bigtable and other services. APIs, there is definitely a few questions on APIs. I'll show you those. A good amount on networking. I want to say they definitely tested VPCs. They want to know network peering, load balancing. We'll talk more about those areas. Question on Cloud Launcher is pretty simple, like why would you want to use Cloud Launcher? Deployment Manager. So there's confusion between Cloud Launcher and Deployment Manager sometimes, so you want to know the difference. We're going to talk about the differences. When it comes to managing compute engine resources, one of the couple questions we're really getting into, why would you want to use a GPU versus a TPU and a CPU? What is the right use case? That was sort of interesting. And then they asked a few questions about Kubernetes, and I would say that was heavily tested. Now, for example, you do need to know the commands for Kubernetes. I'm going to walk you through pretty much some things you want to look at. App Engine, know the difference between premium, App Engine standard, right? And flexible, I mean. Actually, when I say premium and the basic tier, that's network tiering. That was covered as well. But definitely know the difference in app engines. Data solutions, again, heavily covered. They didn't cover like Dataproc or Bigquery too much. What was interesting, though, and when we go to the pricing calculator, they had this fetish for testing you on Bigquery pricing. There is several questions on that, and I'll talk about that. Network resources, again, know how to peer, why you want to peer VPCs. Stackdriver had, probably 3 or 4 questions total, monitoring related. And then there's one that I believe was really focused more on why would you want to use specific features like debug versus trace, for example. IAM now, again, I want to say, in the slides, and when we go to the IAM section, there had to have been probably 10, 12 questions on IAM. They definitely wanted to let you know that IAM was important to know. And I'll walk you through that. And you did need to know specific menus or specific commands to use. Know what a service account is as well. Okay, now when it comes to the blog post, this is the blog post here. Take a look at the blog post. Pretty much covers exactly what we're going to talk about, just in more detail. And again, here is what the exam is about. The beta is already open, effective the 9th. The beta is going to be open until May 30th or so, depending on where you're located and where you can be tested. Again, really depends. If you're in Jacksonville, you have until May 27th or something. So it depends on your testing center and the hours and days that they're open. Let's go ahead and talk about objectives. Again, I'm going to cover, I sort of just talked about those, but I want to talk about a few things a little bit more in detail. And the link is there. We're going to go back to that in a second. Now, the exam is this. It's 104 questions, right? Now, out of the 104 questions, I only had one question with a diagram. And that was basically you had to select the right order of services for a specific GCP app, an application you're going to basically put on GCP. So for example, you wanted to know where to place like cloud storage or cloud pub sub or Bigquery. Like I said, know your services. It's an easy question if you do. Now, Google also, before I forget, there is no case study questions. I didn't see any case study questions like on the Cloud Architect exam, none whatsoever. So you'll have a lot more free time. You don't have 20-something questions that you have to read case studies back and forth. So again, 4 hours is more than enough time. Google recommended practices. Okay, now they referenced Google recommended practices numerous times. So when you are reading Google documentation and you see anything about Google recommended practices, that is something you'll want to know for the test more than likely, because again, that was something they wanted to know. They want you to know the Google recommended. And for example, the Google recommended practices are also called best practices. Take a look at the best practices that Google has in Google Cloud. This is what they want to test you on. For example, each project has a unique project ID, right? Understand project number, project name, right? Understand project ID, what they're for. Projects facilitate accurate costing. Question also is on billing, right? So understand that you could export your bill in CSV or JSON. Now, what about if you wanted to import it into Bigquery? Well, you could do that as well. Go over to export billing data. This talks about ways to export your bill. You could place it in a cloud storage bucket or go to Bigquery. Again, if you know these areas, you got a question or two on the exam given to you. So fairly straightforward. Again, nothing particularly difficult. You should easily be able to pass it if you know those basics. Now, when it comes to G-Cloud, you want to know G-Cloud. You need to know what it is. You need to know the basic syntaxes. If you haven't used G-Cloud, I would recommend you go download the SDK, play around with it, go view projects, update project names, whatever you need to do to get comfortable with it. Understand the correlation between projects and organizations. Configure billing as well. One of the things you definitely need to know was around the difference between an organization and a project. We'll talk more about that as well. So the links are there for you to take a look at. Now, when it comes to IAM, the questions were focused on essentially what menu do you do this? What menu do you do that? How do you write to cloud storage? Permissions. Now, one of the things that I had noticed was there is at least 2 or 3 questions on how do you set up access for auditors? Do you go ahead and create a custom account or not? Do you go ahead and create a service account or not, right? A service account is what? That's more for, that's not for users. That's going to be for what? Basically node to node, a compute engine to the service, so on and so on, right? How to enable APIs. So let's go ahead over to the console, take a look at some of this stuff. Now I'm over in the console. One of the things when it comes to quotas, IAM, etc., make sure you know how to get to the quotas menu. Quotas is under IAM and admin, and then quotas. Again, some of the questions, like I stated, are going to be the old Windows days where you need to know what to click, how to click it. When it comes to APIs, remember that there's quotas, right? That are based on what? They could be based on global, right? They could also be based on what other variables, right? Is it global or not? Is it on the project level? Remember, if you go to the project, there's going to be project quotas. If you go over here, you have quotas with the usage, App Engine, and then you have unlimited quotas as well. Now, also under IAM, a couple interesting areas that they had talked about was service accounts. Why do you want a service account? Well, a service account basically is going to represent that service, just like they're saying. This is going to be basically a service that is going to go out and drop, storage buckets or storage. It's going to go ahead and connect to compute engine. Basically, just understand what a service account is. And when it comes to service accounts, again, this is, more focused on services, not user accounts. Make sure you read this page here around service accounts. For example, there's 2 types of service accounts when it comes to compute engine: a user managed and a Google managed service account. Now, a user managed service account is going to be for a new service that you're creating. A new service account, right, is something that you're going to go ahead and create with identity and access management. And then there's also a question on how to basically look at APIs with G-Cloud. And if you read this here, you can see here, you're looking at this, for example. This is how a service account is, but if you go down, there is right here, for example, APIs. So what was the googleapis.com? What was the essentially the scope is what it was called, and how do you grant access to the service account, right? So just keep on going through this. Now, IAM roles, again, take a look at that as well. Let's go back to the browser here. Another area too, question was on labels. Know what a label is, right? Fairly simple, right? Labels help you identify, find stuff. It's also called a key, right? Is a key value is really what it is. Let's see, 2 more, okay. Question on identity-aware proxy. Now, once again, if you go over here to identity-aware proxy, you can see here, for example, a couple things. Looks like they updated this since I last looked at it. Sort of interesting. Okay, so it says before you can use IAP, you need to configure OAuth consent screen. Okay, so basically you need to configure basically a banner page is what we were called in the old days on Unix. But basically take a look at the IAP, know when to use this and where it fits in. Now, if you go over here, Cryptographic Keys, Google does have cloud management, cloud key management that is as well. Let's go over to, let's go over to Cloud Launcher first. Take a look at that. Now, Cloud Launcher, question on Cloud Launcher, why you want to use it, right? Very simple. Lets you deploy basically a software stack quickly. For example, if you want to deploy LAMP, you could do that fairly simple. Again, fairly straightforward there. Let's go back to the slides. And make sure you know the IAM section pretty well. Know how to identify access permissions, ACLs. We're going to go ahead and talk about a few things here in a second, I believe, on that. Hold on. Also, too, how do you find quotas, right? Via the console. So go over here to compute quotas. And over at quotas, again, this is definitely something you want to know. There was at least one question directly really asking you how to determine what the quotas are for a project. Well, again, look, G Cloud, and you need to know the syntax. So you're going to get a choice of 4 different syntaxes. You got to pick the right one. Check your use quota in a region. What do you run? Right here, right? So make sure you play around with quotas. There's definitely going to be 2 questions, at least on the beta, around that. Now, there's also other information on quotas. You may want to look at, just want to make sure I have the right page. Oh, here it is. IP addresses, okay. Now, when it comes to IP addresses, again, just be aware of in-use IP addresses and static IP addresses as well. Why would you want to have a static IP, right? Again, it's a persistent IP, fairly straightforward. Now, if we go back up here, I want to go over to the load balancing section. I would highly recommend you take a minute. Again, they asked about load balancing. I'm trying not to tell you exactly what you're going to be tested on. I don't think they would appreciate that at Google, but I would recommend you make sure you understand load balancing to the level of knowing the difference between network load balancing, but also HTTP and TCP proxy load balancing, for example. So know the difference between load balancing, why you want to use load balancing. Now, generally with load balancing, you're going to use HTTP or HTTPS, right? For what? For your typical web applications. Now, one of the areas around the, let me point out one more thing here. Where was the menu? It was Ssl Proxy. Okay, so Ssl Proxy. Sometimes there's confusion over when you should use Ssl Proxy versus other types of load balancing. Now, make sure you understand what the Ssl Proxy is for. It's going to terminate, right? It's basically a termination layer is what it is. Now, if you need to, again, use HTTP traffic, then what do you want to use? Use HTTP. Use Cloud Ssl Proxy for terminating. If you get a question asking you about SSL, TLS, make sure you understand the question. Don't select HTTP or network load balancing if you read the question. Just make sure you know the difference. That's really what I'm trying to get at. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. I want to keep this under 15 minutes or so. Okay, so make sure you know quotas, not only how to find quotas with the CLI, Google G Cloud that is, but also know how to find it in the GUI. Okay, let's go over to the pricing calculator. There is at least 3 questions on Bigquery. So let's talk about it. Now, one of the areas that surprised me was not that they asked, about pricing per se, but the fact that they wanted to make sure you knew how to use the pricing calculator. I personally, think an ops test is really not going to be concerned with it, but Google looks at it different. So you want to definitely know. Make sure you take a look at cloud storage, how that's priced, but Bigquery as well. Now, Bigquery is priced on demand or what? Flat rate. On demand or flat rate. Make sure you know that. Also, when you're doing pricing, also understand that, let's go over to flat rate here. Okay. Now, when we're looking at pricing, right, on demand versus flat rate, if you're going to do flat rate, that means probably that you're going to have this service running consistently, whereas on demand, you're going to use it pretty much, for a short period of time. The pricing, of course, is going to be cheaper for flat rate versus on demand. Hint there. Okay, now, when you're doing pricing, after you specify on demand or flat rate, right? Now, there's different plans as well. So you have the 50, you have the 40 to 100, right? And what is that? Now, if you don't know what that is, just look right over here. That's what, right? That's the analytics capacity. Now, storage, just make a note, is sold separately. On the test, you may get a question asking you what other services could you price with Bigquery, right? Make sure you know what the additional services are, right? Hint. Now, when you're looking at other things in the pricing calculator, if we go over to, I think it was Stackdriver here, okay. Now, Stackdriver, understand how Stackdriver is priced as well. Make sure you know how you're priced with metrics and logs as well. I would highly advise you to go take a look at the difference between the two approaches that Google uses for pricing with Stackdriver. You have the free, right, and premium. Understand the difference in log files, like 7-day retention versus like 30 days. But if you need to retain logs for more than, let's say, the amount of time that's required, let's say 30 days if you're on the premium, then you would have to do what? You're going to want to export those. You could do that to Cloud Storage, for example. And then Cloud SQL. Now, Cloud SQL is, of course, priced a couple things. Let me just go. I just got, here it is. Okay, so you have first generation, second generation, and PostgreSQL. When you're doing the pricing exercises, pay attention to where you're at. You've got the instance type here, but also know that this is, of course, based on what? The zones. Take a look at that as well. That's really about all that I've seen on pricing. Pay attention. It might be interesting, too, for you to play around with some of the other areas if you haven't looked at this as well. Okay, so let's go over to the slide again. Now, Stackdriver. Again, remember, I just mentioned, free or premium, make sure you know it. Know the exact steps to set up monitoring and logging. Know alert options. Know what's available versus free and premium. How to use Stackdriver Trace and Debug. Why would you want to use them? Let's go over to the Stackdriver GUI. Now, before I forget, I didn't put this in the notes. You want to know, now, one of the questions was asking you what would be the most efficient way. Now, I don't know if I liked how they asked those questions. There was 2 or 3 like that in the GUI. Like if you're using the interface, the console, I call it the GUI. Again, forgive me, I'm old school. When it goes, again, there could be 3 or 4 different ways to do the same thing depending on what you're doing, right? You go up to search, you go over to monitoring, right, and click on monitoring, or you just go over to Stackdriver, your account. Well, Google was asking what would be the most efficient way to do that. And then they list out the menu areas. So you need to know, how do you get to Stackdriver from the console, for example? And how do you go to set up an alert? Again, know these steps. Let's go over to the browser. So I'm over at the console again. If I want to go to Stackdriver, what do I do, right? I got a couple options. You know, I could go type it in, right? I go over to monitoring here if I want to do that, error reporting. You know, again, I go to the API, so on and so on. I could also go over here and scroll down to monitoring, right? This will bring me over to the Stackdriver website interface. Now, one of the things that you want to pay attention to is make sure you know the difference between these features. Why you want to use debug versus trace, logging and error reporting. For example, if you want to set up a trigger, or you want to be notified when there's like let's say an HTTP 404 error, what could you do? Well, again, you could go ahead and have logs monitored. You could set up error reporting. A couple different ways you could do, you know, some kind of a notification. You could also set up triggers to monitor the logs, right? Whatever you want to do. But here you go over to set up an alert, and you create a policy. Now, when you set up a new policy, there's conditions, notifications, documentation, and you want to name it. What I want to point out here is, how do you get notified if there's an issue? Well, depending on your, you can see here I have upgrade. If I want to upgrade to premium, it gives me additional capabilities. Now, because I'm only in the free tier, basically, I only have the mobile app and the email to be notified. But if I want to be notified by SMS, what do I need? I need to be on what? I need to have the premium tier. And again, just you need to know how to get to create policy. So you want to go where? You want to go to Stackdriver, monitoring, right? Alerting, policies, and create. That's the menu. Again, I told you there's going to be clicky processes to know. This is one of those you may want to pay attention to. Also, take a look at other capabilities like trace. Again, why do you want to use trace, right? You're able to look at specific RPCs. You go ahead and set up analytics, right? Go set up reports. A lot of good capabilities. Like over here, you could really keep track of what's going on with the trace. Latency, for example, most frequent URLs access, what's the latency? You could really set up A lot of good capabilities. Create a new report here, right? Again, if I want to monitor specific service calls and be notified, I can do that. Also note, you could set up a specific time ranges, start and stop, so on and so on. Okay. So make sure you know these areas here. We touched on those. Make sure you know when to use trace and debug. Know the steps to set up monitoring and logging. Know the different account types. Make sure you go in and take a look at these links because it's going to cover, just on this page, there's probably 4 questions you're going to see on those pages there. So know what cloud identity is and know what the use case is. Know when you should use GCP or G Suite authentication. Know how you connect to Compute Engine. That's very important. For example, how do you set up certificates and where would you place the certificates, for example? Boot images. Make sure you know your resources. Make sure you understand that the difference between like an image and a snapshot and which one is global, which one is not, right? Migration options for storage. Go into the storage browser, go over to transfer, and play around with those areas. Make sure you know how to move a bucket basically from one zone to another. Kubernetes, okay. So they definitely like Kubernetes on this test. I would like to say there's 4 or 5 questions at least on Kubernetes. A couple things you want to know. Know what cloud repositories are for. Know container builder, container engine. You'll see areas like, for example, would you want to use container builder and container engine? And why would you want to use those? And they'll ask you to place those in order. You don't get a diagram, but it's more like place it in order. What's a repository do, right? That's where so basically GitHub is what it is. So also too, command to create a cluster. Also know the command to what? View a cluster as well. Definitely a few G-Cloud questions on clusters. So expect 2 command line and 2 use cases, and another one, I think, on basically how to access it in the GUI. So link is here for time purposes. I'm going to go ahead and speed it up. Okay, Cloud Launcher. Cloud Launcher is what? You're going to deploy templates. If you want to deploy a LAMP stack, use Cloud Launcher. PubSub. Know what PubSub is, right? Why would you want to use it? Basically, you could use it for what? Publishing apps, messaging, so on and so on. Data flow. Use that for stream and batch data. Bigtable. Several questions on Bigtable. I want to say 2, not numerous, but 2. Again, these are easy questions if you can know, because one of the things too, people can get confused between Bigtable and Bigquery because it sounds the same, right? Make sure you don't get confused. So Bigtable is what, right? That's your NoSQL database service. Bigquery is what? This is your data warehouse. You're going to use this for analytics. Remember too, Bigquery, you could use that for what? You go ahead and use that for analyzing your billing, right? You could import your billing into Bigquery. Also too, know that there's 2 what? Pricing models for Bigquery. And if you need additional storage, what do? You got to add it. Practice exams on Udemy. I've got a practice exam. The link is there. The discount code is there if you click on that. I'll have it in the description below as well. Now, I am also building a course. I probably won't have it done until the 20th or 21st. It will be on Udemy. I will have, though, a much more concise course on actually one other platform that I just signed a contract to develop. I'll announce that on YouTube when it's done. Now, again, just realize that the practice questions are going to help you study. They're not going to give you the answers to the test. Don't even go there. It's funny because every time I do practice questions, people are like, well, I failed the test because, I thought these were going to be the answers. That's not what this is about. You got to study, right? These are not test dumps or whatever you want to call it. So I wish you luck. Reach out to me if I could answer any questions. I will also be hosting some online seminars as well. I'll post those on YouTube and LinkedIn. Feel free to connect up with me as well. I wish you all luck on the exam. Happy testing. Over and out.